Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam and this week we're tackling one of the big guns. It's Bob Dylan, finally. Bob Dylan, of course, the self-proclaimed song and dance man. Was born in Duluth, Minnesota in 1941, went on to become the spokesman for a folk generation in the 60s. And then in the 70s became a sort of leather-jacketed, bona fide rock and roll icon. And then had a few missteps in the 80s before being reborn with musically, that is, in the 90s, and has stayed on top of his game ever since then. He's always been something of an enigma, Bob Dylan, and he's made so many records that we couldn't possibly have time to review them all today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the top 10 Bob Dylan albums, and I think the way I've approached this is to choose the 10 albums I seem to find myself going back to and listening to the most. I think that's the fairest way to do it, even though it's going to invite all sorts of controversy and vitriol from a lot of Bob Dylan fans out there. I'm not going to go too much into the meaning of the songs or the records, because that kind of thing has been done over and over again by people infinitely more intelligent than I am. But let's get going. At number 10 from 1976, his 17th album, Desire. Now, Desire was the record that he toured with the Rolling Thunder Revue that had Mick Ronson on guitar famously, and Martin Scorsese's recently done a very sort of strange, semi-truthful documentary about it. It's worth checking out though on Netflix. But Desire was a record that it's a really pungent record. Scarlett Rivera plays violin on this record and gives it a real identity. And most famously, it has Hurricane on it, the song about Reuben Carter, the imprisoned boxer, and ISIS, which is a great song. These songs are as powerful now as they've ever been. And Dylan was really playing with characters and his persona at this time. He'd go on stage with his face painted white, and he'd really deliver these songs with his piercing blue eyes. There's some really striking live footage of him playing this stuff. But it's a really good record. It has a kind of unique place in Dylan's canon because of the violin, and it sounds unique, and I enjoy listening to it time and time again. I go back to it often, actually. Number 9 from 1978, Dylan's 19th album, Slow Train Coming. This was the first of Dylan's Born Again albums. It was followed by Saved and Shot of Love. I think this is the best of the Born Again records. It's quite slick. Some people think it's quite overproduced. It's got Tim Drummond on bass and Mark Knopfler, so some very accomplished players here. It's got Slow Train Coming on it, and When You Gonna Wake Up. The Muscle Shoals people are on horns on this record, and they really add that nice beefy sort of slick horn sound to it. So it's also got Man Gave Names to All the Animals, which is a sort of charming song at the end of the album, which became a children's book. It's worth checking out. Very easy to listen to, this record. In fact, I put it on not just a few nights ago. But perhaps not full of his weightiest songs. Number 8 from 1974, his 14th album, a record that certainly isn't full of his weightiest songs, but one I really, really enjoy, Planet Waves. Dylan had just made a couple of pretty poor records, Dylan and Self Portrait, and he got back together with the band, who were his one of his original early backing bands, to make this record. So there's quite a sense of anticipation. He was back with Robbie Robertson and Rick Danko and Levon Helm. Now the result is a collection of good songs, if not great songs, but there are some brilliant performances. On a Night Like This, Going, Going, Gone, the Wedding Song is on here as well. I think it's quite a sort of slight record, but I love the fact that he's back together with the band, and the record swings and it grooves. Perhaps the most famous song is Forever Young, which is sort of wheeled out at a lot of sort of anthemic moments, a lot of sort of charity events and things like that. Number 7 from 1989, Dylan's 26th album, Oh Mercy. I really love this record. Dylan had a difficult time in the 80s. He made some good records, and he made some really bad records. However, even on Dylan's worst records, there is always at least one great song, and that's not an exaggeration. But he'd done Knocked Out Loaded and Down in the Groove, which were not great records in the 80s. and a lot of people had written him off, but he came back by joining up with Daniel Lanois to make Oh Mercy. And you can hear there's a real sense of focus on this record. It sounds like he knows he's got a really great set of songs. The playing is really sharp. The atmosphere is nicely dense without being too sort of pretentious and over the top. It's got Man in the Long Black Coat, which is one of those Dylan songs that people ponder over time and time again lyrically, looking for a meaning, which I doubt is probably even there at all. It's got Everything Is Broken, which is one of his sharpest mid-period blues numbers. But there's also lovely A Shooting Star, What Was It You Wanted, Most of the Time. These are all really, really lovely Bob Dylan songs. And I was thrilled to sort of have Dylan back, writing great songs again, because even I had thought, maybe he's lost his muse for good. So at number 6 from 1997, an album that really signalled the final sort of return of Dylan in many ways, Time Out of Mind. This was his 30th album, and despite doing Oh Mercy, Dylan did do a couple of covers albums after that, and then he also made a pretty poor record called Under the Red Sky. But Time Out of Mind came along towards the end of the 90s and absolutely blew everyone away. This was a real return to form. It won 3 Grammys, Album of the Year. Again, produced by Daniel Lanois, and this time the production is really deliberately creaky and wheezy. You can hear the sort of pistons and cogs whirring, as it were, behind the music, because this is an album about mortality. It's an album about death. It's an album about getting old. It's an album about reflection. There's a real sense of foreboding in tracks like Not Dark Yet and Trying to Get to Heaven. It's also the album that's got Make You Feel My Love on it, which was covered by Billy Joel and Adele, which I think now, because of that, is Dylan's biggest selling song of all time. This was a very happy experience for Dylan. He says in reading in his autobiography Chronicles. And it was an even happier experience for us listening to it, because the album is so strong and full of it's such a return to form that people were rejoicing in the streets. I'm sure there's probably a ticker tape parade somewhere celebrating Bob's final return to form. And he maintained that. This is the point. He maintained that return to form to this day. At number 5 from 1965, his 6th album, Highway 61 Revisited. This was one of the sort of trilogy of great 60s, mid-60s Bob Dylan albums. This was his first full electric album. He'd been going that way a little bit. You may know that Dylan was once an acoustic folk troubadour, and then he famously did a show at Manchester Free Trade Hall where people were shouting Judas because he'd plugged in his electric guitar and betrayed all the sort of bean-munching, sandal-wearing folkies. That's not fair. I don't mean that. But you get the point. So he was on a new path by now, and also you can hear that his songwriting is expanding, his horizons are expanding a little bit. So the folky troubadour for the time being had been laid to rest. There are a lot of blues-based numbers on this record. Like a Rolling Stone is the most famous song, which Rolling Stone magazine did call the greatest single of all time at one point. Mike Bloomfield is adding some real spiky stuff on guitar, which is great. It's got Highway 61 Revisited, Ballad of a Thin Man, the spectre again of Vietnam and the government, and the conspiracy theories about some of the songs of this album abound. But I think again, Rolling Stone called this the 4th greatest album of all time, and it is a brilliant record. But there are Bob Dylan records I do prefer. One of them is at number 4 from 1966. His 7th album. This was the 3rd of the 3 albums in this great trilogy of records. Blonde on Blonde, a double album. It's quite a collection of musicians he plays with on this album, but including Rick Danko and Robbie Robertson from the band, and I always love it when they get together with Bob Dylan and play. This is regarded by many people as the greatest Bob Dylan album. There's so many good songs on here. Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat, I Want You, Just Like a Woman is a really famous and much loved song from this record. For me, the reason it's not higher, I think, is because sound-wise, it's a little bit thin for me. And I've realised that the Dylan albums I prefer to this record, they have a warmer and richer sound. Make no mistake, this is a great, great record. and the consistency levels are really, really high. And Dylan sounds, songwriting wise, like he's absolutely at the top of his game. There seem to be ideas coming from everywhere, and sounds like he's having a lot of fun in the studio as well. But I prefer at number 3 from 2001, his 31st record, Love and Theft. Now, I was talking about Time Out of Mind earlier as being Dylan's great final comeback and how he sustained it. Well, the record that followed Time Out of Mind was Love and Theft, and I actually prefer this record because I prefer the sound of it. It's not quite so wheezy. It's a little bit more confident and muscular. Dylan sounds like he's passed through his kind of like oh, I'm getting old and one day I'm going to die, and now he's just kind of he's accepted that and he's having some fun with it. You can hear that lyrically all over the place, especially in fun songs like Po' Boy, which is a song I really love and always makes me smile. But there are a lot of great songs on this record that he still plays in his live set, and this record is getting on to 20 years old now. So you've got High Water, going to the other Charlie Patton, High Water. I'm having an absolute brain freeze here. Mississippi is another one as well. Honest With Me, of course. Yeah, sorry there, having a brain freeze. And like I say, I love the sound of this record. The playing is very, very bluesy. It's a little bit swampy, which is, I think, a sound that Bob Dylan really, really likes now. And for me, this record was the one that really confirmed that Bob was back. He wasn't just making kind of intermittently great records anymore. That the man had found his muse again, and you really did get the sense that it was back for good. Robert Christgau from The Village Voice, who's a critic I've always enjoyed reading, he said that if Time Out of Mind was Bob Dylan's album about death, then this was his album about immortality. I'm not entirely sure what he means, but it's a good soundbite. And if this is one of the records that helps secure Dylan's songwriting immortality, then so be it, because it's a brilliant record and I love it. At number 2, from 1965, Bob's 5th album, Bringing It All Back Home. This is a transitionary record between the acoustic troubadour and the sort of electric rocker, because half this album is acoustic and half of it is electric. But what's great about this record, apart from the incredibly consistent songwriting, and is that you can really hear Bob is moving away from the early stuff, the sort of protest songs, The Times They Are A-Changing and Blowing in the Wind. And he's experimenting with his songs and his lyrics and his subject matter. I think that may have had a little bit to do with some of the things he might have been smoking at the time, but I can neither confirm nor deny that. Because I don't know, but it's a theory. Now let's just talk about Dylan the folky guy for a second, because I really love all those early folk records. Another side of Bob Dylan, freewheeling Bob Dylan. They're brilliant records, and they have some absolutely perennial masterpieces on them. The reason I haven't put them in this top 10 is because I find myself not going back and listening to them as much as I do these other records. So make of that what you will. But going back to Bring It All Back Home, this was the first of the trilogy. Bring It All Back Home, Highway 61, Blonde on Blonde. 3 more brilliant records you will be hard-pressed to find in a row by a band or an artist. I mean, gosh, just listen to the songs on this record. It's All Right Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, Gates of Eden, Love Minus Zero, and Mr. Tambourine Man, of course. Mr. Tambourine Man has one of my favourite lyrics of all time in it. To dance beneath the diamond sky, with one hand waving free, silhouetted by the sea, circled by the circus sands, with all memory and fate driven deep beneath the waves, let me forget about today until tomorrow. I haven't got a clue what any of that means, but I have the images in my head every time I say it, and it looks beautiful and glorious, and that's if anything is rock and roll poetry to me, that is. A brilliant album, Bringing It All Back Home, and on another day could possibly be pushing for number 1. I don't know, because my number 1 record is a very, very special record to me, and hopefully to many of you as well. And that's from 1975, and it's Blood on the Tracks. Blood on the Tracks. Wow, gosh, what do you say about this record? It's incredibly moving. It's incredibly powerful. When this came out, people were disappointed with it because it didn't have that sort of wide vista, that Dylan vision of the world that people were soaking up and poring over and discussing lyrics about and everything. This was Dylan's introverted record. It was his breakup record. He was separating from his partner Sarah at the time, and because of that, Dylan is turning the mirror on himself and kind of writing about himself and reflecting himself in a way he'd never done before. So some of these songs are very, very personal, and they're very powerful, and they're very moving. You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go, Shelter from the Storm, Simple Twist of Fate. There's a beautiful softness and elegance and warmth to these songs. They sound in a way like they were absolutely effortless to write for Bob, and it was just all coming out. And what do we get when we see Dylan, hear Dylan writing about himself? You can hear the real warmth of the man. There's a wisdom, about Bob Dylan, and a wit that is unique to him that I don't hear in anyone else's songwriting. These are among the reasons why he won the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize rather, for literature a few years ago, because he's Bob Dylan. Songwriting is who he is. Lyric writing and playing with words is who he is. It seems to just sort of drip from his pockets, and he just picks up all these ideas every day, all the time. Just read Chronicles. It's just loaded with brilliant little epithets and lines all over the place, that I find other songwriters, it feels like they have to work harder to get there. With Bob, it's just all over the place. And this record's full of brilliant lines. Tangled Up in Blue opens the album and is regarded by many as one of his greatest songs. And it's just a joy to listen to and get lost in the story. And that this whole album has that atmosphere. The playing is acoustic and warm and unobtrusive. And I think it's Dylan's most consistent album atmospherically. And up to this point, it's certainly his most mature. And it's the one where he gives us most of himself. There's a real generosity in his songwriting spirit, and the kindness that he's prepared to share with us through his songs. It's utterly unique, and I find myself listening to it, and I get hairs on the back of my neck. And for me, there's really no other record I could have put at #1, because this really does have a very special place in my favourite records of all time. So look, that's my Bob top 10. Now, Bob Dylan fans are a crazy bunch of fanatics, and I'm absolutely certain you're going to disagree with so much of this list. There are lots of great records I love of his I couldn't put in there. I think Street Legal's a great record. I love Infidels, I really enjoy. John Wesley Harding, New Morning. I mean, they're all really good records, and all of them could merit a place in this top 10, but I really had to go for the 10 I go back to and listen to most over and over again. Now, I meant it when I said that every single Bob Dylan record has at least one great song on it. So where does a Bob Dylan person, someone wanting to get into Bob Dylan for the first time, go? Blood on the Tracks, Highway 61, Bring It All Back Home, Blonde on Blonde. I think all of these records are as good a starting place as any. But anyway, that's my top 10. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you don't agree with me, say so in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. Keep it clean. We're all about the love of music here, and let's not take it too seriously. But I will be back very soon with another top 10 or another list of artist albums ranked and reviewed for your pleasure. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.